Today we have Barb Chapman, and we're going to be talking about the Squires. It's June 15th, 2021. So Barb, first question. When you hear the word Squires, what just pops into your mind?
Family.
Family.
Yeah.
Family. So
Very much so.
Now you get to elaborate.
Yes.
Why do you think family?
Well, it's been an interesting ride while we were doing it, but it's even been more interesting as we've all grown older. And people that we marched with, we've kept in touch with, and they really do become family. We know their kids, we watch their parents grow older, and, some of our adults that helped us along the way. But they all became family. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a family that, they say you choose your friends, but not necessarily your family, but this family we chose.
Well, that's such an interesting perspective because most people do go directly back to the events, but you're saying that this has really developed post Squires.
Exactly.
That's wonderful.
I mean, not the experience, itself wasn't important, and but certainly when you say that, that's the first thing I think of.
Great. So when did you join the Squires?
I joined in 1968.
And how old and what grade?
I don't remember how old it was.
Or what grade?
I don't remember what grade I was in.
Oh, okay.
I remember Sharon Isley and Judy Calhoun yelling at me down the hallway. I must have been in junior high, and saying, "Hey, you want to do something?" I said, "What do you want to do?" She says, "Well, they're letting girls in this drum corps thing." And of course, both their dads were involved. Mm-hmm. And I remember going home and saying to my parents, "I think I'd like to do this." They didn't realize what they were saying yes to, because we lived out in the country and all the rides back and forth. But no, I joined in 1968, was in the color guard for 4 of the 7 years I was in. Really enjoyed the guard shows that when we would travel in the winter, when we weren't performing in the summer, we put together, our instructors had put together a winter guard, which traveled to different high schools. And back then, a lot of the high schools had bands, but they also had color guards with their bands, and they were the ones that would work in the winter, and we just sort of joined that circuit.
So no band with you?
Nope.
You performed the recorded music?
No, we drummer, single snare drummer.
Wow, how interesting.
Single snare drummer. Yes, and we actually had so many participants, we actually ended up having 2 guards. We had an A and a B. And it was fun because we would go to competitions, and then whoever wanted to ride the bus along with us from the Corps joined us, and it was really fun. It was really, really, really entertaining. That was a lot of fun.
Was it all young women, or was it mixed?
Nope, just women. And our drummer was a boy, John Snyder. Snyder was our drummer. But it was all drill, just like a drill, only on a basketball court. It was really fun.
How interesting.
Yeah, it was really fun.
So when you joined, you first went into the color guard.
Yep.
Was that your intention, or were you open-minded?
I was whatever they needed. I didn't know what I was getting into, and I had a musical background, so I'm surprised I didn't play bugle. But no, it was just most of my friends were in the guard, so you just sort of jump on board with what they were doing. So no, it was just one of those things where you show up and, here, take a flag. Okay.
Did the guard practice with the musicians, or with those separate practices?
Separate. Usually practices were all separate. The drummers practiced, the bugles practiced.
I see.
And then the bugles would practice both sopranos and the baritones separate. And the guard would practice separate. And then at the end of every practice, everybody came together and went through what we had learned. And did the full routine as much as we'd learned, and so they got a good sense of where we're at, for the next rehearsal.
Why don't you describe for me, please, what the guard did? What was its
The guard
role?
is the visual aspect. Well, in the early days, the guard was important because there was a real patriotic spin to the drum corps, and each of our field shows required what they call a color presentation.
Meaning the flags?
Meaning the flag. Okay. The American flag was the center of at least one section of our field show. Okay. And it would be front and center, and, it'd be Battle Hymn of the Republic, or, something in those lines. So in parades, it was very important because we carried the American flag and we carried the Legion flag because they supported us. And I'm sure Judd could give you the other names of the flags that we carried.
Mm-hmm.
But then the remainder of the Guard was visual. We had flags, we had rifles.
Wooden rifles.
Wooden rifles. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, wooden. We had a nice rifle line. And it would go so we would have routines that went with the music. So, if we were in a parade, we would do certain things when the music started and that type of thing. It was really more the visual part of the music. And it was all done on accents within the music. It would our visual would accent what was happening in the music.
Okay.
So it was very important that as we were, doing drills and things, that we accented whatever the bugle line was doing.
So, to your knowledge, when the Squires was first formed, did it have a guard? So, did it always have a guard?
I don't think it did.
Okay.
If I think back to, it started out with just young boys, and if I look at that picture with them on the post office step, I don't believe there was a guard.
So,
but I'm not sure because we didn't let the girls in until later.
well, that was my question. Again, to your knowledge, was the guard formed as a means to allow young women in or to meet new standards and rules of
I
competition?
couldn't tell you that.
Okay.
I'm guessing it was to expand because it became such a community thing. But, we were just a parade corps in the beginning. I mean, we weren't in field competition, but certainly the guard was a key part of that. It was a key part of the corps growing, maturing, becoming more sophisticated.
So do you know, were girls complaining that they weren't
I don't know.
allowed and this happened?
I don't remember it. I remember all of a sudden they were letting the girls in. And, it was just, we didn't have a marching band in school.
Okay.
So, this sort of filled a void for those of us that were involved in the music program, but didn't have necessarily an outlet other than the 2 or 3 concerts we did a year. So I think that this was just sort of an outlet. Back in the day, they had majorettes. This was a natural outlet for the Guard to be part of that. So, yeah.
Well, we do know that the Legion cadets had young women.
Did they?
Yes, right. Right here in
we see
in
that.
the
Yeah.
museum. we have the drum majorette's uniform.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's interesting that an organization developed out of the Legion cadets, but went back to being young men only. So very interesting.
Yes, it is.
If you don't mind, may we stay on this topic for a few moments?
Absolutely.
So, honestly, all those boys and a few girls, did it work?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, socially interactive?
Yeah. We're typical teenagers with all the typical teenager angst,
Right.
But no, it worked. I mean, the thing about drum corps or any kind of military type of thing is the discipline. Yeah, we always had a good time off the field. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, it was discipline, and you paid attention, and you did what you were told, and if you didn't, there were consequences. They'd give the spot to somebody else, or or whatever. So you really wanted to do well. Certainly, it's like any typical group off hours. You had your relationships and all that stuff, but it worked. I mean, we were on co-ed buses. We used to, when we traveled, we would sleep in gymnasiums, and half would be the guys, and the other half, chaperones would be right down the middle. But no, it seemed to work.
Oh, that's great.
And everybody, we got motivated and wanted to do better. So everybody sort of really pushed, and that's where your discipline came in. We
Great.
pushed through lots of stuff that, I look back on and go, we used to do full weekends over at Watson Homestead and do drills Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday.
Now,
Sleep over and...
Competition or
No,
practicing?
this was practice for us to go into competition.
Wow.
And so it got to be pretty routine. We would have a weekend where we just went over and you just immersed yourself for 2.5 days. And mom, the parents came over and cooked meals for us, but it was intense.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So the Squires was renting the facility?
I'm guessing they
presumably?
might have,
Yeah.
yeah. But we would go over to Watson Homestead, and they had, back in the day, I don't know, I haven't been there quite some time, but they had like little bunk houses.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do they still have those?
Well,
Remind me of 4-H
there's
camp.
on-site lodging. Yes.
And we would just bring our sleeping bags, and I mean, it was work from morning to night until the mosquitoes came, and that type of thing. Yeah, that and the June bug. We always loved. When we practiced on Alumni Field, we always loved the crunch of the June bugs under our feet in the summer. So.
A sure sign summer was coming.
Yes, yes.
So, how many years were you in the Guard before you became
drum major?
Drum major.
I was in the Guard for 4 years.
Okay.
And then the previous drum major, Ernie Thurston, yes, went into the service. I think he was leaving for the service. And they did auditions, and Bud Confer and Chuck Calhoun came to me during a Guard practice one day and said, would I be interested in trying out? I hadn't even thought about it. I mean, that wasn't even on my radar. And I said, me? Really? And so they kept talking about it, and I said, well, I'll think about it. But it was a big responsibility. I mean, I wasn't sure I was ready. Certainly had the musical background, but and so we had tryouts and went through a fairly rigid interview process with the board of directors.
Wow.
Outlining expectations for the position, it represented the community. And one board member in particular, I remember, was very concerned that we'd never had a girl drum major, and wasn't sure that was the direction they were going. And I did care about it after I tried out, but prior to that, it was not even on my radar.
That's so interesting.
So ended up getting it, and I was drum major for 3 years before I left the Corps.
So describe for me what is the role of drum major?
Drum major is really in charge of the show on the field. There's no instructors on the field. There's if something goes wrong on the field, you can see everything, you can hear everything, and you can step back and say, oh, they're not getting right where they need to be. Probably the biggest time I can tell you that was when I was drum major was we were performing and I think it's in Judd's book too. We were performing at Shokoff Stadium, DCI, Ithaca. And we had a number called The Men. I can't tell you now who wrote it, but for whatever reason, whether it echoed within Shokoff or whatever, both sides of the field got offbeat. So if you listen to the recording that Chris Calhoun did, we're off by like a half a beat both sides, and that's not the way it was supposed to be. And we were like not quite done with the show, but enough that if we kept that going, we were in trouble. And I can vividly remember thinking, oh no, but I got it back on. That's really kind of the role, was for me to get in front of whoever was off beat, get in front of them, make sure that they're back on beat, and everybody did come back together. There were certain things in the drill that I was the cue for. Certain pivot points that things. So
like a conductor for a symphony?
Oh yes, very much so. It was very much a conductor, but there were also points where I would need to be on the field at certain spots so that people knew where to pivot.
Okay.
And then I would get back up and finish, directing. But occasionally that would be something that I know they'd write into a drill every once in a while. I needed to be in a certain spot so that the drum line knew to be in a certain spot, and everybody else did. I mean, I had to read music. I had to know all the parts. I had to be very clear about direction. There were parts, and timing was a big deal because we only had, I think it's 11 to 13 minutes on the field.
Okay.
And so there were times when the drill maybe needed to slow down more, or I had to take more time before we started the concert, and I'd sit there and go, okay, we need to speed this up, or we need to slow this down, and so that we didn't cross the end line too early or too late. because that was back in the day. That was a very important piece, was the timing, because you would get ticks if you were over time. So in a parade situation, I just called the numbers, said, we're doing 2, we're doing 4, we're doing whatever. You play for a while, you let them rest a little bit while you're marching, because you can't play an entire parade.
No.
It's just, they just couldn't do it. So, and I was there to support some of the younger kids when they would come in. Kind of a community ambassador too. It was
I must say, how old were you when you were doing this?
15, 16, 17.
Wow. It's hard for me to understand how any 15, 16-year-old person could be doing all of that.
Well, and that's the thing drum corps did. It made you mature. Not that I was perfect all the time. I wasn't, but
the responsibility.
Yeah, but
and
you had
the
good
knowledge.
People knew. I mean, it was funny, after every show, Chuck Calhoun always made copies of the judges' comments so that they would say, well, gee, the baritones didn't sound like this, and maybe the sopranos didn't this, and the flags didn't do this, and I was able to read through the comments and, say, how can I help? What can I do to help? So, but yeah, it was great fun. But drum corps really matured you. I mean, you didn't giggle and,
And you had that whole team.
Oh, I was just, very much.
Yeah.
I was just the, figurehead occasionally. I was not, I was certainly not, I really wanted to make sure I was part of the team and wanted to make sure that everybody felt comfortable. I really remember thinking when the new kids came in, I was trying to sort of say, you're going to do great, you're going to do great, or, whatever. And I knew I had some influence that I needed.
Like a mentor.
Yes,
in a way.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I took it very seriously. I mean, we had fun, don't get me wrong, we had fun. But,
so how did you come to leave? Did you age out? Or?
No, I didn't age out. I just thought it was time. I know quite a few of my friends had already left. They didn't wait to age out. And I think the last year was in, I'm looking around and going, my friends are off doing other things. And I was in college, that last year. And it was just time, and I'm comfortable with that. I mean, yes, you always wish you'd go back and do everything over again, but it was time. Most of my friends weren't in it anymore. And, college was broadening my horizons.
Right.
And
so what year would that have been when you left?
74.
74.
My last year was 74.
Okay. Did you stay involved in any way?
I did for a period of time. Actually, I was secretary on the board for a period of time.
Okay.
But not near as involved as some of the other members that stepped back and then came back in and out. I certainly did not get involved like Judd or Denny or some of them. After they aged out, they became instructors and those types of things. I did not do that. But yeah, no, I think it was time. I was seeing another part of the world I wanted to explore.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Schuyler County, small rural county, upstate New York. With the Squires, you're traveling, you're meeting people from different walks of life, different cultures, different races. How did that impact you personally?
Well, certainly, I think growing up, we didn't do a lot of traveling as a family. I don't know as a lot of people did. I mean, we were very much a community, and your summer activities were 4-H camp or the local lakeside park, or there wasn't a lot of get in the car and fly to Europe. I mean, it just wasn't. So what it did for me was that there was a world outside of Schuyler County. One of the favorite trips was Boston. Going to Boston, and to this day love Boston. But we stayed in this beautiful, beautiful island of Nahant in a Knights of Columbus. I mean, it was right on the harbor. I mean, it was just right on the harbor. And, so went into Canada. I'd never been to Canada. We went into Canada, and I thought, I'm in a different country now. I've never done this. But I think that's what it did was, exposed you to, certainly some of the urban things that we did not have. I mean, there were urban, houses that are, so close together. And certainly even back then you understood the difference in socioeconomics when you would drive through certain spots. So I think that's what it brought to me was, hey, there's another world outside of these walls. And television back then, we had 3 channels, and so you didn't have necessarily the exposure. So I think all of us became much more worldly. I hate to say that word, but we did.
That's
It was just not something that we would have been exposed to. It just wasn't. So for that opportunity, I didn't stay in the Corps long enough to go to Denver or to Alabama, but we went to Ohio, went to Canada several times. Boston was probably my favorite trip. I love Boston. But that's what it did. That's what it
So
did.
when you first applied to join, you mentioned just now that you were playing an instrument. What were you playing?
I was playing a reed instrument, though. It wasn't brass. I was clarinet.
Okay.
And I played the piano.
So you had some music.
Yes, and I played piano since I was like 6. So,
Okay.
I mean, I certainly could read music. But it wasn't a brass instrument. And that may have been the difference. I don't know. But yet, I know a lot of the brass players had never picked up a brass instrument. So that was always amazing to me that Chuck and Vern and Carl could get them to even play a note, let alone an entire song, But they did. They were so patient. So patient.
So how did the Squires influence your career choice or your path as an adult, young adult and beyond?
Well, I think as a young adult, it gave me huge confidence that I could actually be a leader. I could actually lead. And if I look back, that was the beginning. It was somebody gave me this group of people to help lead. And I mean, wow. And I think from that perspective, it did a lot because I've always worked to be in a leadership role.
You're now retired.
I am now retired.
And
yep.
what did
My
you...
background is healthcare administration.
Okay.
But I always have been in operations, so I've been in a leadership or administrative role. And there's certainly, the drum corps gave me that self-confidence, no question about it. Not that my parents didn't always support me, but I got that self-confidence that I can do this. I can be more than maybe people think I can be.
That's great.
So
speaking of your parents are
Ed and June Cullen.
And did they become involved in the Squires?
Goodness, yes. My parents were one of those parents that whatever you were into,
they were too.
I think it was probably a way for them to keep track of us. However, they jumped in with both feet. And it's interesting because a lot of the parents had gone to, this is a small community, had gone to school together. So when I came home and said, Judy Calhoun's dad asked me to be in drum corps, I know Chuck and Betty. So a lot of our parents knew each other, either had grown up or were in the social circles. But my parents jumped in. My mother sewed. We had sashes. She and Carol Franzese, I can see the bedroom covered with sashes that they had to sew because we couldn't get them made, and we needed them. Mom and Dad both volunteered. They were chaperones. We used to sell light bulbs. I remember Dad being in charge of selling light bulbs, and we all had to go house to house and sell light bulbs. And he was in charge of that. We sold programs. And I remember he was in charge of that. He was on the board along with a lot of the other dads. A lot of the dads were on the board. And actually, as it grew, several of the moms got involved on the board. But it was just amazing. They just jumped. I mean, my father would go to work at Shepherd Niles at 7 o'clock in the morning at work. He would leave at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He would drive to Rochester or Syracuse for wherever we were. He would drive back home and get back up and be at work the next morning at 7. He gave up all his vacations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think about how precious my vacation days were when I was working. That he used it for drum corps.
Mm-hmm.
Mom was a stay-at-home mom, but all those parents gave up those vacation days that were very precious. But most of us, my sister was in the Corps with me. My brother didn't get in the Corps.
What's
He was
your sister's name?
Cheryl.
Okay.
My brother got into scouting, but the two of us, but they were in everything.
But don't
everything.
you think, I mean, as a mother now,
Yes.
looking back, wouldn't you say that your parents got a lot out of it?
Oh, I can
It wasn't
assure you.
just that they were doing it for you.
No.
It was for them as
It
well.
was. And as you know, as a mom, your social life tends to, wherever your kids are, as they grow up, that's
Right.
kind of your social life. And that certainly was the case with them.
Yeah.
And, and the parents, you couldn't have asked for a nicer group of parents. And they did everything. I mean, it just everything. They'd walk along the parades with us. They'd, if somebody's crying, whatever, they were just wonderful. Every single one of them. You had, a couple of the guys that drove the equipment van. Everybody was volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
We had the old school buses. We had dads that worked on them. We had dads that drove them. Even people that didn't have kids in the Corps helped and drove.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Bob King. I don't know if you know Bob, but he didn't have any kids in the Corps, but he had been in Seneca Chiefs, and he wanted to help out. He drove our bus. He was one of our favorite bus drivers, actually, because he was a hoot to be around. He did a thing called hand check. So we'd be coming home at, late at night or something. He'd turn the lights on the bus and say, hand check. We all had to go. Only the way Bob can do it. So.
Uh-huh.
But, it wasn't just because you had someone in the Corps.
Mm-hmm.
People helped us that weren't in the Corps.
Yeah.
And they
So now you're talking about community pride.
Absolutely.
A few words about that, especially in the later, you mentioned you didn't go to Denver or
Right.
Alabama, but those were big events for this small community, weren't
Very
they?
big events. Very, very big. And, I think one of my memories that is most dear to me is when we won the world championship and we came back into the county, and all of a sudden we're in the bus. We're not thinking anything. We're just tired and dirty, and we'd been in Boston for a long time. All of a sudden we see sirens and we see the sheriff's car, and we thought, must be there's a crash or something in it. They ended up escorting the buses to Lafayette Park, and the place was packed. Signs. We were just going, what? Well, apparently everybody, some of the parents had called ahead, and the whole town. The sheriff was there, the mayor was there. We did a performance, obviously, as part of that. Even though we were exhausted, we didn't care. We certainly wanted to perform, but it was something that you just don't see. But the small town for that period of time was very much our supporter, all the way across. School buses, the schools knew about us and supported us, If we needed to leave early for a contest or something, I know they'd give us our assignments ahead, and, as long as our parents approved. But it was truly,
fantastic.
Truly. We performed at the start-finish line at the Grand Prix. They invited us to perform at the Grand Prix of United States. They had,
The whole world was
the
there.
whole world was there, and here we are on the start-finish line performing. It's because the community was proud of us and, wanted to show that they supported us. But yeah, community was just wonderful. Just wonderful.
I know you weren't part of it at the end, but you want to talk about that? Do you have thoughts about how it all evolved at the end?
Obviously it hurt because we'd put so much time into it, and so many people, other than those of us that performed, put so much time into it. As with all organizations, they evolve. It's just like music, in the 60s evolved to be music in the 70s that moved, and we have, it was just a natural evolution, I believe. one that I'm sad about, and I'm not sure that it's gone in the right direction, but it certainly is a direction that keeps the youth of today engaged, and that's really all you want. You want to keep the youth engaged. Certainly, we would not be. We'd be laughed out at the caliber we were if we went today. It's just not the same. It's just so professional and so intense. And I know that my parents put out the money. She'd give us $5 for the weekend, and we had to figure out how to make it stretch at McDonald's. I know the Royce Haight Fund were kids, and then when we went on tour, we had kids whose parents couldn't afford it, and the Royce Haight Fund helped.
Great.
So when I say community, I truly mean I know some of the parents know some of the kids that were the core that didn't have money to eat, and they would just give them money on the side. It's too big of an operation now. We certainly couldn't do it. It was a moment in time. It was our little Camelot, and it evolved into what it needed to evolve to keep it fresh and new. I still go to drum corps shows. Bob and I, my husband and I both belong, so we'll go to drum corps shows, and at least once a year. Obviously, the last couple of years they haven't had them, but we keep track of who's doing what. And of course, Steve being involved in it keeps us more in track. We've got several members that are involved with senior corps now. And I'm sure Judd will give you that lowdown of everybody that stayed involved for a period of time. So,
That's
yeah,
great.
It's beautiful. Music is beautiful. It's stirring. It's emotional. Matter of fact, before I came today, I listened to my favorite year, which was 73.
Squires recordings?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
That's great.
So I said, I got to get in the mood for this. So, no, and 73 was my favorite year. And that whole summer was just magical. I mean, we were winning constantly. We were at the top of our game. And, you just walked in and everybody just knew you were a Squire and you were somebody important and that type of thing. So, yeah.
So, in the last couple weeks, Chuck Calhoun died.
Yes.
The last of the founding
Yes.
fathers, literally.
Yep, literally.
Would like to speak about the three men and their names? And some words?
Vern Alling and Carl Isley and Chuck Calhoun. All three of them had been involved in corps. The history of drum corps, from what I understand, is it came out of the soldiers coming home and created these little pockets, particularly around the New York City area and the Philadelphia area. Okay. And then those little pockets, became moms and dads and went out into the world, and they, the Jiva and Neva Appelknockers, I believe Vern and Chuck were both members of that. I know Carl was involved with the Salt Band when the Watkins Salt had a band. So the three of them, I know Carl and Chuck grew up together. Vern, I think, was not from here originally. Had come in as in the salt company, but they were the ones that put it all together. I mean, they took a bunch of kids off the street that couldn't know their left from the right. And the nice thing about all of them was they knew when they had gotten us to where they needed to bring other people in. If we were going to go the next step, they knew they had to release and let the next group in, which that's hard to do. I mean, it's hard to step back and say, I can't give what needs to be given to these kids because they've worked so hard. Obviously, a very fond memories. I did not know Vern well. He really had gotten out of the Corps, or at least was sort of from a distance. Carl was writing the drill when I joined. Chuck was doing the music. I can't remember. There's a gentleman in Odessa that was doing the drums at the time. But they were always there. I mean, Carl was always there. And Chuck for the end, because he had some more kids that were in it that stayed in to the end. But certainly we owe the three of them a huge debt. Absolutely huge debt.
On so many levels.
Oh, personally, professionally,
Community.
From a community.
Yeah.
Like I said, we have no idea what some of these parents did to help. that we couldn't even imagine. I remember one of our Mrs. Roberts with her little card table. She had made Squires buttons, and that was part of our revenue, was to sell souvenirs at these shows we went to. A little cardboard table with her little homemade.
She had made.
She had made, yep, and little streamers they had made. But and it was just an effort on everyone's part. But it was out of love and commitment, and we were very close family.
Great. Well, let's end it there, the way we started, talking about family.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenda.